Start this now. And I'll start with our first question.
Sure.
What is your background and how did it lead you to work with Tuolumne River Trust?
Yeah, so I studied environmental science at Colorado College. And then after graduating from CC, I did a handful of outdoor recreation jobs leading trips in West Virginia and Colorado. But I wanted to make a pivot essentially to working in the conservation space. So I built off some of the research that I'd done related to large landscape conservation in college and applied for the SNAP program and was able to put together a pretty compelling argument that I'd be a good fit with TRT given some of the research that I did. And I think Seth really appreciated that, and it was just a really good fit. And so I was really excited when I got to commit my SNAP term to TRT.
That's awesome. Yeah, they definitely have one of the top sites, so you chose a good one.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the SNAP program?
Sure. So the SNAP program mainly recruits recent college grads and matches them with conservation organizations across the Sierra Nevada region. In my program, there are about 25 or so participants, and but only one or two of those were in Sonora. So there was one other participant who worked at the Resource Conservation District for the county, and then it was me versus other regions had 5 or 6 snaps in one particular town. So I had a little bit more of a less AmeriCorps intensive experience, but I think that was for the better and got really close with Seth and a number of the other TRT staffers and really enjoyed my time in Sonora.
Nice. That's awesome. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your favorite part of the job and also your least favorite part of the job.
Sure. So I think my favorite part was probably leading the larger or more intensive volunteer events that we did. The In Good Company week really stood out as a positive experience. That one, we worked mainly through Cliff Bar, but they partnered with a handful of other companies and essentially were able to fund a number of individuals to come out and volunteer for a week. So that was a cool experience to get to work with folks over a longer period of time and get a lot of work done on the ground. So that was definitely a highlight. And I think the lowlights there weren't any persistent lowlights necessarily, but I had quite a few bad run-ins with poison oak during a handful of volunteer projects. So that was pretty bad. And then I certainly don't fondly remember trying to frantically set up the sandbox for the watershed education program with only 5 or 10 minutes to spare and then all the kids coming in. So that was a challenge at times, but always got it figured out.
Yeah, that definitely resonates with me. I had a fun run-in with poison oak this past spring and found out that I'm allergic, so that can be pretty rough.
Yeah, I got it. We did a winter, like a January trail improvement project along the Tuolumne and the Stanislaus, and since it was the winter, none of the leaves had come out yet, and so I was just moving a bunch of brush and then touched my face, and my entire face swelled up for days, and it was pretty awful, but got through it.
Oh, that's so brutal. I think most people who've done trail work in the lower Tuolumne watershed can probably empathize with that. There's a lot of poison oak.
Yeah. So that was certainly the worst portion, but if that's all it was obviously a good time.
Yeah, no kidding. Was there a part of the TRT mission that spoke to you the most?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the start, I was obviously really attracted to, the natural resources conservation components of the mission, and that's why I listed TRT as my top organization on my SNAP application. But I think as I got integrated into the organization, I really grew to appreciate how much work TRT does with a pretty diverse set of stakeholders in the community in terms of working with the Forest Service and also the state of California and timber conservation groups. And I think being able to be the facilitator and sort of the local convener for that many organizations is really impressive. And then as well, towards the end of my work with TRT, I think I had also grown to appreciate how diverse the mission is and the fact that it's not a conservation organization that just does conservation work on the ground. I mean, TRT does a ton of really impressive community outreach and education work in the Central Valley, and then a lot of really impressive policy analysis and advocacy in San Francisco. And I think that having that kind of suite of skills and commitments that across the organization makes it a lot stronger and a lot more unique than a lot of other conservation organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. They kind of fill a unique role within the forest, and one that you don't really see around the state very frequently. So it's kind of cool to see how they make it work.
For sure.
How would you say your time with TRT influenced your career trajectory?
I mean, I think it was incredibly important. I don't think that I would have gotten my current position with the Western Governors Association without it. WJ does a lot of much higher level sort of forestry and natural resources work, and TRT and the SNAP program were pretty instrumental in, giving me the on the ground experience, both in terms of doing the restoration projects, but also working with such a diverse set of stakeholders. And that was a really important grounding for me to make the transition into the policy world. And I'm very grateful to TRT for that experience.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I think that's the kind of experience that you really have to live. You can't really take a class on how to do that. So it's really important to get that with TRT. Let's see here. Do you have any advice or recommendations for young folks wanting to get involved in this type of work?
Yeah, I think after leaving AmeriCorps, I grew to appreciate how well regarded it is by employers and conservation and community organizations. I think people really respect when people elect to, give a year of their time to serving the country essentially, and doing it in a way that promotes ecological and community health. And I would really encourage young people, whether they know what they want to do with their career or not, to volunteer with AmeriCorps or with another sort of national volunteer association. And then I think in the conservation realm, a really important aspect for me was just the research that I did in college related to landscape conservation and national parks and climate change. And I think that if college students or, community college students to take on a research role or independent study or that sort of thing, that can really help you stand out in terms of showing your research skills, but also your employability and your drive and ability to work on your own and all those sorts of things that is really important as you launch your career.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting trajectory that different people take through all of these options and ideas. And I think SNAP really does fill a really great niche in the world of getting experience, because it's hard to just like dive into something. So having a year where you're giving back and you're also gaining some of these skills is pretty amazing.
For sure.
Let's see. Next question is, what was your biggest takeaway from working with TRT?
I think mine would be just the importance of the collaborative conservation model that they use in terms of working with the Forest Service and trying to extend their capacity, and how important that is. I think that federal agencies, they'll be the first ones to admit that they need a lot of help in terms of, delivering their mission to the utmost of their abilities. And I think that organizations like TRT fill a really important role in supporting state and federal land managers. And I think that was one of my biggest takeaways, is just that this is a model that works and that it's replicable, and that it tells a really good story in terms of all of these different people and organizations coming together. And I think, that story is, not only is it effective, but it also, it helps drive funding and helps organizations get grants, and it just kind of keeps the system running in a good functional direction. And so I always appreciate when I learn about other organizations that are like TRT and their commitment to working with a diverse group and trying to get results done on the ground. I think it's really important across the West and across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And it's kind of an uphill battle, you know, there's a lot going on. So there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of agencies that don't have the capacity to do that. So that's a huge, huge perk of working with TRT and what they do. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, and I think it stands out even more just given the national dialogue of how divided everything is right now. And I think that seeing these glimmers of hope of people of different political parties and backgrounds and demographics coming together to work on shared challenges is especially important right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Little beacon of hope for all of us.
Yeah.
So you touched on this a little bit, but maybe you can elaborate on where you are now and the type of work that you're doing.
Sure. So after I left TRT, I moved to Denver. And in the moving portion, I got offered a fellowship with the Western Governors Association, which is a bipartisan regional policy organization. And so we work to advance the governor's collective policy priorities in DC. And so a lot of that is related to really kind of Western-centric issues like wildfire and drought, erosion, outdoor recreation, things like that. That I worked on at TRT. And so certainly see the direct connection. And like I said before, I'm very grateful to TRT for giving me on the ground experience in those areas. And since completing that fellowship, I've come on full time with WGA. So I've been on the policy team for about 2 years now, and I'm currently leading a policy project for Governor Kate Brown of Oregon related to electric vehicles investments in the West. And I'm really excited to lead that over the next 9 or 10 months.
That's awesome. You got a big legacy of being a successful snap to leave TRT and go on to big things.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Seth is always my biggest cheerleader in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. He is still super stoked to talk about you all the time.